So the question is what did they smash into? What did they collide with? What caused this? Now this is where the kind of the hypothesizing began. And there were so many thoughts about what could cause this, and some of them bordered on the totally preposterous. Some of them were rather made a lot of sense to me. More ridiculous ones were that somehow that birds had been contacted by flying saucer. Flying saucers had caused this. There was some kind of an extraterrestrial event that killed all of these things. And then there were some people that thought that perhaps it was an electromagnetic weapon that had been unleashed on these birds. Now this area of Arkansas used to be in a tight missile belt. So there were bunkers all across that north central part of the state. And so it's not that far from Little Rock Air Force Base, so which has occasionally stealth bombers and things like that at it. So people in Arkansas are attuned to what governments can do, and an electromagnetic weapon doesn't sound all that preposterous if you live there and see all the other things. Remember, this is only about 75 miles from the famous Pine Bluff Arsenal, which was the nation's storehouse for all of its nerve gas and chemical weapons for about 50 years. So anyway, electromagnetic weapons, that was another thing. This was also an area that there's a new deep natural gas belt that has been discovered in Arkansas and some shale formations there. And so now there's a natural gas rush in north central Arkansas. And what they're doing is they have a technique where they inject high water under high pressure into rocks. What it does is it cracks the rocks in a process called fracking. And when the rocks are cracked deep underground, I mean thousands of feet underground, it releases methane gas, which is then piped up to the surface. And that's what your natural gas is. Well, some people thought that maybe that this fracking process had released a body of natural gas from deep sediments, and this stuff had leaked up underneath a roost, and the methane had killed the birds. Now that sounds kind of ridiculous, but remember that there are certain places on Earth that do have natural releases of gases that do kill animals, but the gases are not methane. They're usually carbon dioxide that are trapped in deep lakes in Africa. It's happened a couple of times. About 15 years ago, there was an event where in Cameroon, a deep volcanic lake, there was a volcanic disturbance in the sediments. These lakes are thousands of feet deep. CO2 that was trapped in the sediments under great pressure, under deep pressure, bubbled up at night, came up to the surface. It's heavier than air, so it floats along the surface like this. The surface of the ground just kind of follows it around. This is like science fiction. It seeped into villages, killed a couple thousand people as they slept. It's odorless. You can't detect it. We're breathing it right now, but in high concentrations, more than 10% in the air, and it will put you out and will kill you in a matter of a few minutes. Killed animals, cattle, wild animals, elephants, people, and so the thought that there might be something like that happening in Arkansas is not, I suppose there's some logic behind it. But anyway, I think all three of those things, flying saucers, electromagnetic weapons, fracking, and methane gas can be eliminated. What people said, though, is that they thought maybe that somebody had, on New Year's Eve, had fired fireworks into the roost that freaked the birds out and made them fly, and maybe they just crashed into one another. And then people said, well, yeah, okay, but generally, when people actually try to disrupt blackbird roosts. Now, blackbird roosts get to be nuisances in places like that. People actually do not like blackbird roosts on the property. The main reason is that if you have hundreds of thousands of blackbirds, What do birds do?
Right.
Yes, that's right. And over a period of weeks or months in the winter, 1 million blackbirds can leave about this much bird poop on the ground underneath the roost. So it's all over your car, kills the trees. People try to disrupt roosts and make the birds go away. They want them away somewhere else. So it's not inconceivable that somebody might shoot some fireworks, especially on New Year's Eve, into a blackbird roost to try to make the birds go away. But the evidence that arose a little bit later was that was pretty convincing, was that this didn't happen just instantaneously. I mean, you would have to fire rockets into this roost for maybe hours or something to get all of this, get the birds riled up. Because once it's dark, they're on the roost, they're really hard. They don't want to move. It's just very difficult to get the birds to shift their position after dark when they're on a roost like that. What the radar showed from Little Rock Air Force Base anyway was a plume of birds that came up into the air column several thousand feet, whirled around, and stayed up for several hours, up to 6 hours. So these birds, it was a very cold evening, there was no rain, the weather fronts had already moved through, but the temperature was dropping rapidly, so it was in the 20s there. And the birds were up in a big column flying around, pitch dark, and the best hypothesis that we have is that they actually flew into each other. Now, birds can't see in the dark really much better than we can. And you know, if you're flying at 30 miles an hour, you're flying this way, and another bird is flying this way, and you hit, it's just like having a car wreck at high speed, at high elevation. And so if you tumble like this and spiral into a street or a rooftop or a car or a windshield, you're going to be smashed flat, and most of the bones in your body will be fractured. And that's exactly what the forensic evidence showed, that the birds were up for several hours. They were circling around. They either, you know, it could have been, one of the factors could have been that the cold temperatures. But for whatever reason, they didn't settle quickly. They were up. It's unusual for birds to fly in a circle like that, aimlessly, at dark, going nowhere. Especially if there are millions of them involved. A death rate of a couple of percentage points would yield 5,000. Anyway, I think what really seized the imagination of the public, though, wasn't necessarily a few dead birds. The thousands, that was pretty unusual. The fact that it landed in people's yards. Most of the time when events like this happen, especially in a state like Arkansas. I mean, Arkansas is as large as Virginia, but it has only 2.8 million people, so it's largely a rural state with a lot of cropland. If this event had happened 10 miles east of Beebe in agricultural fields, nobody would have noticed it. The carcasses would have been eaten by raccoons and possums and foxes and coyotes, and nobody would have seen it or noticed it. Things like this, these kills, these natural kills, happen all the time. But it was the juxtaposition of this event, and then there was a fish kill in the Arkansas River a couple of days later. There were estimates of maybe 100,000 to 200,000 drum. This is a freshwater drum. It's a big fish. I mean, they get to be this big. That washed up on the banks of the Arkansas River between Little Rock and somewhere downstream. And then a couple of days after that, there was another blackbird kill that was reported in southern Louisiana in Point Coupé Parish with a few hundred birds. And then a few days after that, there was another kill that was reported in Kentucky. And so immediately people tried to connect the dots. They said, oh my God, you know, here's one in Arkansas, and here's one in Louisiana, and then here's one in Kentucky. Something is happening. Some kind of something that's tying all of these things together. Well, what's the common denominator? Is there any?